Good evening. I'm psychiatrist Jay Fauver, live from Fort Wayne, Indiana. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Now in its 27th year, Matters of the Mind is a live call-in program where you have the chance to choose the topic for discussion. So if you have any questions concerning mental health issues, give me a call here in the Fort Wayne area by dialing 969-2720, or if you're calling coast to coast, you may dial toll free at 866-969-2720. Now on a fairly regular basis, I am broadcasting live every Monday night from our spectacular PBS Fort Wayne studios, which lie in the shadows of the Purdue Fort Wayne campus. And if you'd like to contact me with an email question that I can answer on the air, you may write me via the internet at Matters of the Mind, all one word, at WFWA.org. That's Matters of the Mind at WFWA.org. And I'll start tonight's program with an email I recently received. It reads, Dear Dr. Fauver, when I go on psychiatric medications, I respond much more quickly than expected to the positive effects. On the other hand, I seem to go backwards after just a couple of weeks, causing the need for frequent medication and dosage changes. Why might this be happening? Well, I'm going to do a lot of speculation here because I'm speculating that perhaps you're having some difficulty with mood disturbances related not to just antidepressants where you need treatment for depression, but you may have a condition called bipolar disorder where you're having highs and lows. And again, I'm reading in between the lines there. You take psychiatric medications. I'm going to speculate they might be antidepressant medications, and then you feel good, if not better than expected briefly, because basically when you take an antidepressant medication and you're prone to having highs and lows, you're going to have a little bit of a revved up feeling for a little while on an antidepressant medication, but it can cause you, if you have bipolar disorder, to have some symptoms where you don't need to sleep as much, your thoughts might be racing, might be a little bit more impulsive, and on the high side, it's kind of like stepping on the gas too much, then you crash because you run out of gas, and that's when you get more depressed. So many people who are being treated for depression will take antidepressant medications as their psychiatric medication, but if they have an underlying condition called bipolar disorder, they need a mood stabilizer. So instead of an antidepressant, which acts as an accelerator, you need something more along the lines of a mood stabilizer or cruise control on the mood that would kind of level you out. I would suspect that you need to have another diagnostic assessment to see what might be going on there to determine what kind of medication you might be needing. But I'm going to suspect that if you feel good for a while and then you don't feel good thereafter after a couple of weeks, I suspect that you might need more something along the lines of a mood stabilizer. Thanks for your email. Let's go to our first caller. Hello, Luann. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Luann, you had mentioned that your son was diagnosed with schizophrenia 14 years ago and was recently evaluated and diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. What are the similarities and differences? Basically, schizoaffective disorder is a subtype of schizophrenia, Luann. So schizophrenia is a condition where it's a neurobiological condition, starts in the womb, certain things need to trigger it, but basically it's a disturbance in the front part of the brain where it's a bit underactive, and the side part of the brain is overactive, and the side part of the brain is the part of the brain where you try to maintain contact with reality. That's the perceptual awareness part of the brain where you can have auditory hallucinations where voices are talking to you, and you can have difficulty with delusions where you have fixed false beliefs. Day by day, people with schizophrenia will have difficulty with processing information. They'll have difficulty with interacting with others and being able to pick up social cues. They often have difficulty getting their thoughts together, and they have trouble functioning on a day-to-day basis because of these difficulties with processing information in their brains, as well as the so-called positive symptoms of hallucinations, delusions, difficulty with the agitation. That's schizophrenia, and that's a day-to-day phenomenon. Schizoaffective disorder is where on top of those symptoms, day-to-day, periodically you can have highs that are related to mania, where you don't need to sleep as much, you're more impulsive, you have racing thoughts going from one thing to another, and you can have lows where you have severe depression, you want to sleep all the time, you're even more withdrawn and sad and lacking enjoyment compared to the rest of the time. So Schizoaffective disorder is a mood disturbance that's occurring periodically on top of day-to-day schizophrenia symptoms. So not uncommonly, somebody might have a diagnosis of schizophrenia where they are indeed diagnosed with an antipsychotic medication, and thereafter it's noticed that they're having some highs and lows periodically. Those people might need an antipsychotic medication and an anti-epileptic medication on top of it, or a medication like lithium, which is also a mood-stabilizing medication. So if you have schizoaffective disorder, you might need an antipsychotic medication with another mood-stabilizing medication on top of that. So that's the difference there. Is it important to sort that out? The most important thing to do with either condition, whether it be schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, is for somebody to take their antipsychotic medication day by day by day. And in many cases, that's all somebody will need. Occasionally, if somebody has a severe depressive episode associated with schizoaffective disorder, we might add a bit of an antidepressant medication, typically not for a long period of time, but they might add a little bit of an antidepressant to try to bring them out of it. Luann, you can be encouraged because we now have a entirely new medication called Cobenfy that came out about a month ago. Cobenfy is a whole different treatment strategy for the treatment of schizophrenia. For the treatment of schizophrenia for the past 60 years, we've been focusing on blocking dopamine, going all the way back to the days of Thorazine when it was introduced in the 1950s. So we've always been focusing on blocking dopamine. And Cobenfy is the first medication that actually increases acetylcholine. So if you increase acetylcholine in a certain part of the brain, it actually indirectly decreases dopamine. So it's a whole different type of treatment. So we have a lot of hope that it's going to give us an entirely new spectrum of treatment in the treatment of schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. So this is a very exciting time in psychiatry now that we have that as our first of what we expect to be many different medications that will be primarily affecting the brain of somebody with schizophrenia in a different way than just simply blocking dopamine. Luann, thanks for your call. Let's go to the next caller. Hello, Diane. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Well, Diane, you want me to explain narcissism. Are you born with it? Is it developed over time? How would we treat it and communicate with someone who has it? Well, I'll start with that latter part of the question first, Diane, because if somebody has narcissism, they're not going to be really receptive or open to hearing that they have narcissism. Narcissism is basically where you're only thinking about yourself and you tend to neglect the needs of others. You tend to be very focused on yourself. You want other people to talk about you. So it all comes back to you as a person with narcissism for somebody who has narcissism. So you can imagine a person with narcissism doesn't want to hear that they're self-centered and that they tend to turn conversations around to them. So it's something that's very difficult to explain to somebody unless they are willing to identify that there's a difficulty in their lives with interpersonal relationships. People with narcissism will often have difficulty with socialization, and they have problems with interpersonal relationships. So they will struggle with that. Are you born with it? We don't think there's a lot of high genetics with narcissism. I think it's something that people will develop in their early childhood experiences, and it comes back to their relationships with their parental figures. And often those relationships are developed before the age of 8 years old. So you can have difficulty with feeling especially entitled and privileged at a young age, and if you continue that through your adolescence and young adult years, it can kind of be a lifelong issue. But if somebody is interested in wondering why they have difficulty with interpersonal relationships, then that's where the possibility of their having narcissistic traits can be reviewed. Diane, thanks for your call. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Matthew. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Matthew, you'd mentioned that you're having a hard time sleeping at night. It takes you a long time getting to bed. How can you treat that? Matthew, in the 21st century, when I hear about people having a hard time getting to bed, getting to sleep, I'm always thinking social media. Are you by chance looking at social media late at night? Because there's algorithms in social medias. We can't forget that. Algorithms will keep you engaged. That's what it's all about. They're watching, they're tracking what you're viewing on social media, and they're feeding you more and more information to keep you engaged. It's a brilliant way to keep people online because it's a means of tracking what interests you. So for instance, if you really enjoy looking at football clips, for instance, it's going to keep feeding you more football clips. So in any type of topic that might be interesting to you. So the first thing I'd recommend, Matthew, is you got to get away from the social media and try to get away from any digital media within a couple hours of going to bed. Now you're thinking, what am I supposed to do? Well, back in the old days, you used to have these things called books, and even magazines for that matter, but you can look at books and try to read one chapter at a time. Get yourself not to the point where you want to read the whole book, but try to get away from social media and read something that's not going to keep you involved from an algorithmic standpoint to reading and viewing more and more and more things. Books, the words on the page, you actually have to think, you have to read what's in front of you, and it can make you tired in doing so. So historically, we've told people to read chapter books where they read one chapter, they get to a certain point, they put the book down. Try to get away from the bright television screens, and that includes PBS. You shouldn't be watching PBS late at night because these bright screens on televisions now actually biologically keep you awake, because what they do is they will affect your pineal gland. Your pineal gland is right smack in the middle of your brain. It secretes melatonin. When does it secrete melatonin? When it starts to get dark. So it gives our brain a natural signal to go to sleep. So this front part of the brain over here, right smack in the middle of the brain, is the pineal gland. It's releasing melatonin, and it's known as the vampire hormone because it goes up, it gets up when it gets dark. So melatonin increases when your retini are not being stimulated with bright light. If you stimulate your retini with bright light, melatonin is suppressed, and it's harder to go to sleep. So that's one thing I'd recommend right off the bat. Try to get away from any social media, any television late at night if you're having trouble going to sleep. Now, if it's a way, social media, watching television, if that's a means by which you kind of wind down and you're able to turn your brain off and go to sleep, great. But many people will say they not uncommonly will lose a half hour, 1 hour, or even 2 hours of sleep just by staying engaged with social media at nighttime, because the algorithm kind of draws you in and it's hard to get away from that. So I'll often recommend people getting away from social media or television at nighttime. Secondly, try to exercise, get some kind of physical activity earlier in the day. Later in the day can actually keep you awake as well, but try to get some physical activity earlier in the day. Watch your caffeine content, especially late afternoon and thereafter. Caffeine can obviously keep your brain more awake and give you difficulty getting to sleep. And if you're getting to sleep at a certain time, many times people want to sleep in if they haven't gotten to sleep adequately enough. We call that delayed circadian rhythm disturbances, where they go to bed later than they'd wish, but then they sleep in the following morning. It's important to try to set that alarm and get yourself up a little bit earlier to try to reset that clock if you're trying to go to bed earlier as well. Thanks for your call. Let's go to the next caller. Hello, Julie. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Well, Julie, you had mentioned you'd been diagnosed with the cancer 7 years ago, and now it's in remission. That's fantastic. How do you stop obsessing with thoughts of it returning and dying from cancer? Move on with your life, Julie. I mean, it's fantastic that you're in remission from cancer, and we always want to hear that word recovery, but if you're in remission and presumably going into recovery from cancer, you have to trust your clinicians that they have not found any more cancer. Now, you had a life-threatening experience. When anybody has a life-threatening experience, either it be with cancer or a cardiac condition, they will remember that experience, and it's called post-traumatic stress, where you've had a stressful situation be traumatic to you, and it kind of woke you up. So it can give you, instead of the ongoing sense of an impending catastrophe, think of it as a chance for a new life. You could have died from the cancer, perhaps. Okay, now you've survived it. You're a so-called cancer survivor. Talk to other people about your experiences. Give them encouragement. Be grateful that you have the oncology support to be able to recover from cancer. So as opposed to looking at your life experience as being potentially catastrophic for the possibility of a relapse, be grateful for the life that you've been given and move on from that. So it's a matter of changing your perspective on what could happen. Julie, from everything we know, death is 100% certain for those of us mortals. So it's something that's going to happen. You've been given a new lease on life because it sounds like you've so-called cheated death with cancer. And the nice thing about a lot of cancer treatments nowadays is many of them are very treatable. It used to be thought that certain cancers were inevitably fatal, and now I'm hearing about a lot of these cancers being over 96% or so treatable. So There's a lot of potentials, treatments out there for cancers that give people long-term recovery. Julia, I wish you the best. Thanks for calling. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Jim. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Jim, you'd mentioned you had a mini stroke 2 months ago and you're cognitively okay, but you can't remember names. Is there an explanation on why that's happening? A mini stroke, Jim, is basically where you had maybe a small blood vessel blockage, and a mini stroke is where you didn't have a full-fledged stroke that would necessarily be manifested on an MRI or a CT scan of the brain, where you'd have a notable area of damage. A mini stroke, you might have experienced what's called a transient ischemic attack, a TIA, where it was just a brief loss of blood flow to a certain part of the brain. That can give you memory disturbances. When that occurs, it's kind of like having a traumatic brain injury, Jim, where if you have a traumatic brain injury, there's a brief excessive release to the point of neurotoxicity of this chemical called glutamate. Glutamate is the excitatory neurotransmitter of our brain, and if you have an excessive amount of glutamate released in mass, you can have neurotoxicity where you have a shriveling up of some of the branches of neurons, and in doing so you can have trouble sometimes with mood disturbances, but not uncommonly, especially in this area down here in the side part of the brain, with memory. So the question would be, okay, are there any means by which you can have any occupational or even physical therapy for the purpose of recovering maybe what you've lost? Try to keep yourself cognitively active, keep yourself involved with socialization, learning new activities, memory type of games that you can do. Try to keep your brain busy and active. That's one of the best ways to get the little branching areas to going. Again, I mentioned earlier exercise in the morning is great for sleep, but physical exercise actually helps with the brain development, especially with the memory center of the brain. So the hippocampus here is the memory center of the brain. You can exercise and actually cause the hippocampus to be more fluffy and get more branching of the neurons themselves. Sometimes the neurologist can give you some ideas on what kind of medications you could use specifically for the purpose of trying to rebranch those neurons and make them more fluffy. But it all comes back to glutamate in general, and the key is to try to use your brain as much as possible to try to stimulate that growth, because 30 years ago, we thought that once you had strokes or once you had damage to the brain, it was always irreversible, because it was thought 30 years ago that the brain can't regrow back neurons or branching. And now we know that's entirely untrue. We now realize that the brain does grow back in certain areas, and this branching of the neurons can occur within a matter of a day or two if you do certain things, and will stimulate certain chemicals. So talk to your primary care clinician about that. Talk to your neurologist and kind of see what ideas they might have for you, Jim. Jim, thanks for your call. Let's go to our next email. We have another email waiting for us. There it is. It reads, Dear Dr. Favre, my friend gets seasonal depression. What is something I could do to help, or activities that we could do together to help her? Seasonal depression is basically where somebody gets depressed in the late fall and it continues over the winter months into around late March or April when it gets bright again. There's more seasonal depression at the northern latitudes than there are the southern latitudes. So for instance, somebody in Alaska is more likely to have a seasonal depression, winter depression especially, compared to somebody in Florida. So the farther north on the latitude you go, the more likely you're going to have depression in the wintertime. Well, I mentioned earlier the pineal gland. The pineal gland responds to the brightness of the light around us. So as the retini are getting stimulated with light, the bright light will decrease the melatonin in the pineal gland, and thereby you can be more awake and alert, and off you go. And with seasonal depression, you have more darkness occurring, so you have that pineal gland getting more stimulated, more melatonin is being released, and you actually feel tired, you're less prone to socializing, you want to eat more, especially carbohydrates in the wintertime. Many people with seasonal depression will notice that they're more tired, they sleep more, and overall they're more socially withdrawn. So the best thing you can do for your friend with seasonal depression is try to get your friend out and about more often, especially in the morning. I would suggest if you have a friend with seasonal depression, best thing you can do is try to take your friend for a walk in the early morning hours around 9, 10 a.m. when the sun's coming up, peeking above the horizon. In the wintertime, try to get out and go for a walk and get some fresh air, but most importantly, you're getting some exposure to sunlight that way. in the early morning hours. Now, there are light boxes that can be used for treatment, but you're trying to help your friend, as a friend, who has seasonal depression. So you can also socialize on a regular basis, because many people with seasonal depression don't want to socialize. Get them out, have them doing things, and especially exercising. I think that's the third time tonight I've mentioned exercising, but exercising can do a great job for seasonal depression. For many people, that's the last thing they want to do. But hey, if you exercise in the darkness of the wintertime, it can really help you out, because exercising can help your mood, especially if you have seasonal depression. Thanks for your email. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Randall. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Randall, you had mentioned you have a friend who has bipolar manic depression. So it'd be bipolar depression. Was prescribed Latuda, had a long-term psychotic episode. Is that drug at fault? Usually, Randall, if you take a medication like Latuda, which is a dopamine receptor blocker, but it has many other features associated with it, if it's used for bipolar disorder itself, it's used as a mood stabilizer, it will treat an underlying psychotic condition. Now, a psychotic condition basically is where somebody loses touch with reality. Latuda wouldn't be prone to doing that. Even in the clinical trials for bipolar depression, Latuda was not associated directly with causing a psychotic episode. Now, could an antidepressant medication do that? Absolutely, positively. So if you have an underlying bipolar depression, let's say, and you're prone to having highs, but more often than not, you're having lows, and because you're having lows, somebody gives you an antidepressant medication as a prescription, then you can have a psychotic episode directly related to that antidepressant medication. But Latuda, no, not so much. It's more of a mood stabilizer that actually will work as an antipsychotic medication. I would suggest that your friend might have taken an antidepressant medication with Latuda, and that could have provoked a psychotic episode. Or I'd suggest maybe that on the natural course of the illness, the psychosis might have appeared later on, which it sometimes will do. If somebody has bipolar disorder, they're having highs and lows, they can have a psychotic episode that occurs later on in the natural course of the illness itself. But I would doubt that Latuda actually provoked that, Randall. Randall, thanks for your call. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Pamela. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Pamela, you want to know what mental health disorders could possibly mirror attention deficit disorder. Well, people with attention deficit disorder, by definition, need to have the attention deficit disorder symptoms, the inattentiveness, the distractibility, the difficulty with procrastination, the difficulty with perseverance and vigilance in their day-to-day activities. People with ADHD or attention deficit disorder will need to have those kind of symptoms appearing initially as a child or adolescent, and they're occurring to some degree day by day based on their life circumstances. Now, you don't all of a sudden develop ADHD when you're an adult. You might notice that the symptoms are more problematic when you get to a certain level of your academic pursuits, or that you notice that you're being challenged cognitively in a way that you weren't previously, so it might come out more later on, but the symptoms should have already been there going all the way back to the young adult years. And the reason for that is your brain in the front here is what's affected predominantly with ADHD. I say ADHD, hyperactivity is the H part of that. With attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, you also have impulsivity, you have hyperactivity, you're involved in all these different things and you're not getting anything done. ADD with the inattentive type with attention deficit disorders where you're predominantly having trouble paying attention to things. So in either case, they're primarily affecting the front part of the brain. The front part of the brain fully develops by the time you're 24, and it used to be thought that people would grow out of attention deficit disorder by the time they got to be 24. To some degree, over 90% of the people will have some kind of residual symptoms, even going into the adult years. Now, going into the adult years, you're not typically in school anymore. You're not being challenged day by day to pay attention to things that aren't very interesting. And that's where people with ADD will suffer. So what kind of other conditions can mimic attention deficit disorder symptoms? Depression. When you have trouble with depression, you'll often have difficulty with speed of processing. So it's like your brain has slow internet speed, and you have difficulty processing information. There's a phenomenon called pseudodementia, where people have depression in their older years, and they think they have dementia, but they actually have depression. You treat the depression, the difficulty with memory and speed of processing will improve. So that's a predominant type of condition that can kind of mirror some of the symptoms of ADD. Low thyroid, very, very common, especially with women. We do see it occasionally with men, but low thyroid can certainly mimic the symptoms of attention deficit disorder, where somebody will say they have trouble processing with information, trouble with memory, and attention span. Menopausal women, and the average age of menopause is around 51. So menopausal women can, by decreasing estrogen, which goes to the hippocampus right there, the memory center of the brain. It's studded with little estrogen receptors. With estrogen going down during menopause, that can give you a lot of trouble with memory and concentration, attention span, and distractibility. Diabetes, when people have high blood sugars, if the blood sugars are high and then low and going back and forth, that too can give you a lot of difficulty with ADD-like symptoms. And very prominently, a condition we're identifying more and more and more will be a condition called sleep apnea. It's where somebody will snore at night. They'll have difficulty with exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide at night, so they get less oxygen to the brain. Less oxygen to the brain at night will give you the next day more difficulty with concentration, focus, and memory. Untreated sleep apnea is very, very commonly associated with ADD-like symptoms. So we have to sort through all that as we're talking to somebody who has difficulty with attention span and distractibility. Thanks for your call. Unfortunately, I'm out of time for this evening. If you have any questions concerning mental health issues, you may write me via the internet at mattersofthemind@wfwa.org. I'm psychiatrist Jay Favre, and you've been watching PBS Fort Wayne Matters of the Mind, now available on YouTube. God willing and PBS willing, I'll be back again next week. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Preceding program on PBS Fort Wayne was made possible in part by
Cameron Psychiatry, providing counseling and care for those that may struggle with emotional and behavioral challenges. More information available at CameronMCH.com.